Hey guys, I guess we'll get started. Before we kick into the first session, I'll kind of just maybe talk through the agenda and I'll kind of show you just what you guys will be building towards today. Cool. And I guess just a heads up, this session should hopefully be recorded. So I guess if you miss any parts, we'll try and get a recording up later, maybe next week or the week after. Cool. So just in terms of agenda, so I guess this week, or today's workshop is the front end. So last week we built the back end. And so today we'll be building the front end to connect up to this back end. In terms of what it looks like, so I guess this is what we're building towards. So the header bar, login functionality, there's a sidebar. And basically, this is kind of just an example project. So we thought we would build something like an MSA project submission. And so if we think back to the back end, we collected things like GitHub links, the ability to do comments, student logins, and then basically we're pulling this data to then populate these cards. So I guess in this sort of demo project, people can log in, they can then submit their phase 2 project, and then it kind of just shows up on this dashboard. Then you can kind of click, and there's your description. Clicking on this takes you to GitHub, and then down here you can have the ability to add comments. If you remember back to the back-end session. So yeah, I guess at a high level, this is what we're building, and I'll touch on this again towards the end of the session, I guess end of today, just in terms of how this ties into the assessment criteria. But yeah, I guess that's the front end. And then I guess in terms of agenda, so let me just pull that up. So I guess we'll be starting off with some GitHub stuff first. So last week we ended with GitHub, but we kind of just talked through it rather than actually going through it. So today we thought we would kick off with, I guess, creating a basic web app and then deploying that to Azure. And then after that, then we'll start going on to the basics of React. So this front end's built with React. So we'll go on to things like creating a React web app, the folder structure, material UI, and Storybook. And that should take us from about 11:15 to about 12:30. Around 12:30 we can break for lunch, about an hour, so then we can come back at around 1:30. Then we'll look to using Apollo client to integrate to the backend that we built last week. And then we'll finish off today with building a submission form. So on the sidebar here, there's a submit button, and you can use that button to then populate these cards. So we'll kind of run through how to do that and how that ties in with your backend and kind of how to build the UI. And that should probably take us to the end of the day, and then we can probably take some questions or run through the assessment criteria or, yeah, I guess just stuff like that to wrap things up. Cool. So I guess with that, I'll hand it over to Paul, who will kick us off with the GitHub session. I guess that you know.
Oh, you might have top off.
I guess if anyone has any questions while we're going through, feel free to just raise your hand and one of us will come and go through later.
Hey guys, yeah, so first of all, well done for waking up early. I think we are a pretty small cohort this year. So if you guys like stuck or have a question, just give a shout out. It's not like 200 of us here, so it's pretty chill, I think. Yeah, so last week, I don't know if you guys remember, but by the end of the workshop, I talked a little bit about how we could do a bit of a DevOps. So we're actually going to start off implementing a little bit of a CI/CD pipeline, and it should be pretty light, but just follow along. But I'll first off start by pulling up our GitHub repo. Okay, so what we're basically going to be doing is on top of initializing the base front-end React application, we're going to be setting up a automated pipeline that deploys that application to Azure. So as you guys kind of progress through today, you can sort of start making changes, pushing your changes to the GitHub repo, and you should see all your features, all your changes being rebuilt and being pushed live to Azure production. Yeah, so it's pretty neat, and we'll dive into that. But I guess a little bit about DevOps, DevOps is basically just like a setup process, and there's various tools that you can use to bring DevOps into organization. There's things like Azure DevOps. You've probably heard of that in the Azure Fundamental. There's like things like Octopus Deploy. But today we're going to be specifically starting out with GitHub Action, which is basically, again, Microsoft CI/CD tools. But if you sort of understand how to set up the pipeline, you understand how to use Git, and you go to any organization and they ask like, hey, do you know DevOps? You can pretty much say yes. Like, yeah. So, all right, let's start off by creating our repo. If you already have a repo from last week, don't worry about this part. Obviously, just maybe you already have it cloned. Just clone your repo and we'll add our front-end project there. But for anyone who might have not created a repo yet, I'm just going to go from scratch and created a repo that we're going to be using to work throughout today. So go ahead and create NZMSA. Cool. Keep it public. That's fine. Probably add a README. For the git ignore, I'll probably do the basic Visual Studio git ignore. And then I'll go ahead and create that repo. So if you already have a repo created last week or existing one you want to use, just use that one. Yeah, and obviously once that's created, we're going to clone our remote repository to a local computer. So I'm just going to do it on the desktop. So if you do a shift right click again, you can open up command line or PowerShell. And since I'm on my desktop, I can go ahead and do a git clone. Okay, I think it's using my secondary screen as the main screen. So let's quickly change that. Cool thing. Okay, so things should show up on the screen instead now. All right, so now I've cloned my repository, right? Which is this one here. We can navigate inside of it. And today, since we're going to be working with front end, it's ideal to sort of go into your repo and open it with Visual Studio Code so that we can easily sort of make code changes and stuff. If you don't have Visual Studio option in your right click, you might have to like launch it manually, but that's okay. We've got that going, and now we're inside our repo. You can see that we're on our main branch. We don't really have anything here yet, but we can open a terminal. So if you press Control and the squiggly line, that should open up your terminal, but you can do it from here as well, I believe. Yes, correct. Yeah, you can do it from there. And this will basically just work the same as if you were to open terminal in your folder. So you can run git status. And yeah, as you can see, we're inside our repo on the main branch. So what we're going to do next is, obviously it's really bad to make direct changes to main branch. We should only put code that we already tested in the main branch. So let's go ahead and create a new branch that we'll be working on. So I can do git checkout dash branch and then do a feature. Maybe I'll call it GitHub Action. And that should switch us to our new branch. And you can see at the bottom here that now we're on GitHub Action branch. But obviously it's going to be more than that. We're going to be creating a front end as well. All right, cool. So is everyone following so far? I hope. In that case, since we have Node.js installed, we can actually run this particular command, which you can copy from here. npx create React app, and this is the directory name for your app, so you can give it anything. And we're going to use the template TypeScript. And essentially what this does is that it will scaffold a base project for us. And that would basically give us everything we need to start developing a front-end application in React with TypeScript. So let's do that. Inside my repo, I can go ahead and run that particular command. It's npx create, or you can just copy it if you want, create React app, and here's the directory that you want to call it. So maybe I'll call it front end. You can call it whatever you like. Template. We're going to use TypeScript for that. Cool. And that will just run for a while, but it's just going to basically create all the file that we need. You can see here now there's a directory called front end. And Node would just basically set up everything we need, you know, everything that we need for React application. And we should get a base React project that we can start with. So it makes it really easy for us to develop features. Does anyone have any questions so far? We all good? But yeah, just give me a shout out if you guys stuck or you guys need help. So for those who managed to get that scaffolding going, I guess what you could do in the meantime is make sure you can log into Azure portal, because we're going to be creating an app service. So let's see if I can log in. Let's quickly log into that. Cool. Cool. So while that's still creating, so yeah, we're going to be deploying our web application to Azure. Again, Azure make it super easy for us to set up automatic deployment and all that stuff. It plays quite nicely with GitHub because, you know, Microsoft product. It should. All right, awesome. So if we just have a look at our repo again, we now have the front end stuff, which is really good. Oh, it's still going. All good. Sweet, so that's all done. So now we have this front-end React application, a base project. What we could do is basically if we set location to be the front end, right? Because at the moment we're in the root of the repo, and our front end application actually reside in the front end. If you just navigate into that folder, then you can try run npm start, and hopefully if all goes well, we should be able to start a local development server for our React application. And we should see our React website running locally. Sweet as, yeah. Who managed to get to this part? Like, did anyone manage to? Cool. Some people, a couple of us. Sweet. Maybe I'll give you just a few minutes to try get the base application running. Anyone has issue? If you could go around and help. Yeah. Oh, no worries. Good? Yeah, just gonna quickly run through that step. For those who might have missed the initial step, I might just run through that quickly again. So what we essentially wanted to do is create a base repository that we can be continuously putting in changes as Roger take you through the development today. So you can go create a new repo, and then give it like MSA, yearbook, or whatever, and this is going to be a repository that holds your application, both front end and back end. If you already have an existing repo, that's fine, but then you can choose public or private. That's up to you. Feel free to just add a README as well. But for git ignore, you can add the Visual Studio git ignore. Yeah, and then you can go ahead and create a repo. Once the repo is created, there's a button here to clone that. You can basically copy that URL and then run a git clone. I run a git clone on my desktop, but yeah, you can run it in any directory you want. And obviously that's going to clone the repo to your local computer, and then open up a Visual Studio inside the repo, and then from there you can run the npx command, which was this command at the on the front page of 2021 phase 2. There's a npx create React app. So if you run that, that should scaffold the project. Yeah, how are we doing with time? Cool. Can I just get a show of hand who managed to sort of get that base project? Cool. Sweet as. If anyone still need help, I'll come around and help you guys, but we'll progress for now. Awesome. So now you've got a working application running locally on your computer. You can do Control-C to like kill it. Doesn't go away. That's fine. But obviously we have made some changes. If you look into the source control tab, these are all your changes, right? So let's make a git commit through Visual Studio. So I'm just gonna say added base front end project, and then if we hit commit, that is basically running a git commit with the message that we typed there. So now if I do git status in my terminal, right? Oh, it says nothing to commit because this is the new branch. We obviously haven't pushed this branch. So you see this little publish change button at the bottom? We can click on this. And then now, if we go back to our repository, give it a refresh, we should now have our new branch published to our repo, which is feature GitHub Action. Cool, so inside feature GitHub Action, we can see that now we have our front-end project. So that's good to go. Yeah. Did you guys manage to push your changes? Yes? Hope so. So basically, that's a source control management tab. If you made some changes, there will be changes that shows up here, and you can make commit easily through there. Cool. just because of time, might have to press forward a little bit. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create an app service that we're going to build our code and deploy to. So on Azure, make sure you log into Azure, go create a resource, and we're going to deploy our front-end web application, right? So we can select web application. Cool. So now in the create web app, we can go ahead and select resource. If you guys don't have a resource group created, just feel free to create one. Resource group just basically group all the resources on Azure together. So I've got one created already called MSA 2021. So feel free to create a new one there if you haven't got one. Then I'm just going to create MSA Frontend 2021 website as well. And if anyone uses exactly the same name as this one, you're basically going to take that one, and I'm not going to be able to deploy it. But yeah, so maybe use a different name for your website. And this is going to be a publicly accessible domain name, right? It's going to be MSA Frontend 2021.azurewebsite.net. So pick whatever name you want for your front end. And then since we are deploying a Node application, in the runtime stack, make sure you choose Node 14, long-term support, and we will run it on Windows machine. Region, of course, feel free to select whatever. You can leave it as it is, and hopefully for your tier, it should be free. So yeah. Cool. Give you guys a few seconds to sort of do that configuration. And then there's a deployment preview button here. So if you progress to the next stage, we can actually enable our deployment from here. It actually makes it quite easy. So if you progress to the next page, you should arrive at the deployment. Enable that, and make sure you log in with your GitHub account. And then select your MSA. What's my repo called? MSA yearbook repo that you created earlier. And as you recall that we are working inside our feature GitHub action branch. So yeah, just make sure that you select all the correct configuration for that. And essentially, once we hit review and create this web app, what it's going to do is it's going to add this workflow configuration. And this is a YAML file that describes what GitHub Action Agent should do in order to deploy, in order to build the code and deploy to Azure. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. But hopefully you guys got to this part because we have to sort of power through a little bit. So I'll go ahead and create that. And you can review all the information there and hit create. And this will basically instantiate the app services on Azure. Cool, and then we'll give it a few seconds. So now if I go to app service, deployment fail. That's not too good. So maybe we'll try redeploy. Okay. Well, since it failed, I might do that again. Deployment fail on Azure. Well, thanks Microsoft. So I'll just quickly do that again. Or maybe someone took my domain name. I don't know. MSA Frontend. Paul. I call it Paul. So hopefully no one here is named Paul. And obviously choose window for your operating system. I'm just going to leave the region as Central US. In the deployment, enable that. MSA Yearbook 2021, yep. Cool, hopefully this time it works. Did anyone manage to get the deployment going? Cool. It's long-term, like it's LTS already, so 14 is fine. And I tested last night and it works, so should be fine. Should be fine, right? Oh, sweet, yeah, 14, perfect. Cool, so now if I go to my app services, I should hopefully see my application somewhere. Oh, it's still deploying, so just give it some time. But if you're stuck, just put your hands up and the MSP will come and help. Yeah. Roger, do you mind helping that guy out? Yeah.
I don't know, but
Yo, so deployment successful. If you guys go to the App Services tab, you now should see your front-end application. And now if you go to your app service for your front end and you try to browse, it's because I don't think we have deployed anything. Oh, wait. Yeah. Yeah, so if you try to browse it, obviously, you know, hey, it's like a blank app services. We haven't deployed anything to that yet.
Azure actually puts an HTML there for you.
Yeah. Cool. But if you guys recall that we enabled the deployment on app service, and you might have seen that YAML file. If we go back to our repo on GitHub, you should actually notice this GitHub workflow folder. And if you go into that, you would notice that actually what I want to show you is if you go to the commit history for your branch, you can see that there's a extra commit that Azure made. And this was to add the workflow file to your repo. And if you look at what that workflow file is, which is inside GitHub workflow, we open that up. And it's actually a YAML file that describes how this repo should be deployed. So if we take a quick look at this YAML file, you can see the steps here that, first of all, the GitHub agent will check out your code, and then it will set up the Node.js version 14. And then here's the important part. It will run npm install, npm build, and after that, it will basically run a deployment to Azure in the final step. And how it knows where to deploy or the credential, it uses this publish profile. And you can see that publish profile points to some sort of variable. This particular variable is actually stored inside the setting tab. So if you go to setting for your repo and you go to secret, you would notice that Azure actually set up this publish profile variable for us. And this is how GitHub will know where to deploy your application to. So now if you go to the action tab, you would see that the deployment actually failed. And we saw earlier that the website is still inaccessible because something didn't go right? So if we go into what happened with the deployment, and we look at the error, and it basically say that there's no such a file or directory to run the npm install, npm build. And that's probably because if we look at our repo, we're on feature branch, our project is actually not at the root directory. Our project is actually inside the front-end folder. So GitHub Action try to run npm install and npm build on the root folder, which doesn't contain the project. So what we need to do is basically tell it to run the npm build inside the front-end folder. So now if we go back to our local repository, I'm just going to open up. Yeah, I'll open up the Visual Studio Code that we have. Obviously, we are a little bit behind in terms of the commit. We don't have this GitHub workflow folder because that was added by Azure. So we're going to have to pull the latest changes. So if you click on that little synchronize button, now it will basically sync all the latest changes from the remote repository. And if we now have this GitHub workflow folder. So opening that up, we should see the YAML file. So as we saw before that our YAML file broke, our pipeline broke because it doesn't know where the project is. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell it where the project is. So what we can do is under jobs, we can add a working directory parameter. So we can do default and then run. Yeah, sorry guys, because this slot is until sort of 1 hour, so I'm trying to power through it. But I'll come around and help. Cool. So basically, if you add default run and add a working directory parameter, it will basically tell that this workflow, the rest of the steps should be executed inside the front-end folder. And that makes sense because we want to be running npm install and npm build inside our front-end folder where the React application is. And another really important part is, of course, this particular step, which does the actual deployment to Azure. We need to specify our package that we're going to deploy. So just a quick demonstration. If I actually run an npm build locally, as an npm build. Oh, OK. npm run build. Thanks, Roger. Maybe I'm not in the right directory. Yeah. OK. So I need to be. Of course, we just explained that before. You need to be inside the front-end folder to run npm build. But this is just for demonstration, so npm run build. But what npm run build does is that it just builds a optimized build version of the your React app so that you can deploy it to production. Ah, right. Yes, yep. There's a script down here that run React script build. Sweet. But what we want to demonstrate is that now inside the front end, there's this build folder, and this is the build folder that needs to be published to Azure Web Services that we set up. So in the workflow file, as we saw earlier, that we need to specify that build folder that needs to be published to Azure. So we know that the build folder gets created inside the front-end folder. So we can do front-end and then build. Yeah, because as we can see that when we run npm build, it creates that production folder called build inside the folder. So we need to specify that, hey, Azure, if you want to deploy to the app service, deploy this package, and that package is the front end and build. Cool. And another important thing to note is this particular on push branches. This thing is basically a trigger. It means that on every changes done to, say, at the moment, feature GitHub action, rerun this workflow file. Yeah. So every time we push out changes to the repo, our CI/CD pipeline is going to rerun and redeploy to Azure. So maybe we can add main branch there as well. What it means is that now if we make changes to feature GitHub action or make changes to main branch, it will redeploy our application, rebuild and redeploy our application. But to simplify it even further, we can do this, which means now any changes to any feature branches will basically trigger redeployment. Obviously, this might not be the best way to do it. It really ups to how your team wants to do it. We can remove it later, but this is just for demonstration. So now I'm going to go ahead and make a commit. And maybe I'll call it fix the workflow file. So once I make that commit and I push that to the repo, cool. So if we go back to our GitHub, we should now see the latest commit that I just made, fix the workflow file. And if you recall, okay, that broke it. Oh, okay, so I think I have some mistake here. Oh, sorry guys, I missed an S. Default should have an S as well. You can find this file under DevOps folder on NZMSA as well. It'll be very similar, but that one is for backend. So we just fix that file, put an S there. Cool, I'm just going to do a quick recommit. And now if we go back to our repo, check out our GitHub action. All right, we should see that latest commit. And since we have this particular trigger, that says any changes to any feature branch, kick off a redeployment to Azure. If we now go to Action tab, we should see that YAML file telling GitHub what to do to build and redeploy our front end to Azure. And we can take a quick look. Everything is good so far. At the moment, it's running npm install and npm build. Which we can see here in the steps. We are currently running the npm build. And obviously after that, it will run the deployment to using the publish profile to hopefully deploy our code to Azure. And if everything works correctly, we should see our website live. Yeah, so I guess the benefit of doing this is that you introduce CI, automation into your code, and as you go along today in Roger's section, you can basically make changes, and every time you push, you're going to see that you're going to see your new changes deployed live to Azure. So we're kind of running out of time a little bit. Probably don't want to go over time, eh? Cool. So now if you look at the action tab of your repo, you can see that green tick there where it runs successfully. If now we go back to our app service on Azure, MSA, front-end poll, and if we browse the website again, we can see that our website is actually live at MSA front-end poll.azure website. Sorry, we went through that a little bit fast, but did anyone actually manage to get the website deployed? No one. So kind of close, I guess.
So there a docs poll for the front-end changes?
No, but that is for backend. I will add the front-end part as well, because I wasn't too sure how we're going to do it, whether the same way as backend or, but we're here, so I decided to do it the same way as backend. Yeah, so I'll adjust the doc to make sure that it covers the front-end part as well, but it's essentially very much the same process as the backend. But yeah, I guess if you don't mind, Roger, we'll give a couple more minutes to help the student. No rush? Okay, cool. Yeah, so just before I go around and help everyone, I guess like CI/CD is super important because like not everyone is gonna know how to deploy your application, but if you have the workflow file that reside inside your repo, it is kind of self-documented in a way, right? Like if you work for an organization and then you had to pick up a repo to work on, you might have no clue how this application is being deployed. But if you have the CI/CD pipeline set up, someone new can actually inspect that and just kind of learn how this application is being deployed, being maintained, being built. It's really, really neat. Because like imagine if you were to like publish a website and you do it manually every time, you probably have to run npm build locally, copying that build folder onto like the server, and hopefully it's accessible. By having this pipeline, it just does it automatically every time. And another benefit is that, you know, as you're developing, you're putting in your new changes, merging your feature, and suddenly your pipeline breaks. That is actually really good. It just means that the latest change you introduce break the pipeline, and that allows you to fix it, rather than, you know, you spend like months developing, and then one day you try to publish it manually, and nothing works. So as you can see, like this, having the pipeline, it continuously keeping your repository up to date, keeping your, you know, ensuring that if you need to change anything in the deployment, you would know right away, rather than like finding it out way too late. Yeah, so that's a little bit about the CI/CD pipeline. Just to demonstrate it a little bit further, because at the moment, we're kind of telling the pipeline to rerun every time we make every little commit to feature branches. And that's actually not the best way to do it, because imagine sometime you make a really small commit, like, oh, I spell the title wrong, and you push that commit to the repo. Now the Azure is going to rerun and rebuild and redeploy everything. You probably don't want that to happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the feature from the trigger. And let's go ahead and test making changes. So at the moment, you can see that this is a very much a basic React default template, right? The title is called React Application. So let's go ahead and make changes to the title. So under front end, if I go to public and I go to index.html, I can see that the title is currently React App. Maybe I'll change that to, you know, MSA Yearbook 2021. Cool. And currently we're on GitHub Action, right? GitHub Action branch. Quickly do that commit. Change the title, and I will push that to the remote repo. But since we are on a feature branch and we have removed the trigger from the branches, what's going to happen is that GitHub Action is no longer going to redeploy our application. So if you go back to our repository, you can see now that it didn't kick off a redeployment, which is good because we have removed that trigger. Now we can freely make as many commits as we want to feature branch. But what we did was that we left the trigger on the main branch, and that's great because after you tested your feature and you make sure that the feature works, right? We can actually do a merge to main. And because we merged to main, now main has some new changes. It's gonna trigger a redeployment from a main branch. So let's see what that looks like. So back in our repo, we can see that, okay, we made some recent changes. Let's do a pull request. So this is what you would do in a real organization. You would develop your feature, your changes on your feature branch. You make sure you tested it, everything works. You create a pull request for your team to review. So basically, basically that just contained the changes that we did. So I'm going to go ahead and confirm the merge. And recall that because we had that trigger on the main branch, now that we merge our feature branch into main, it is going to kick off that redeployment. And it's going to rebuild our code and redeploy to Azure. Yeah, so while we're waiting for that, I guess it's really neat because in an organization, right, when you're finishing developing feature branches, maybe you want to utilize this automation to basically go live as soon as you merge that feature to main branch, which actually can save a lot of time. Especially when your system grow in complexity. So in a large organization, some system might have like 20 steps, right? So there's no way that you could do the deployment manually because the chances are you or your team could miss one of the configuration steps. But by having the CI/CD pipeline, you make sure that every time you make code changes, it's going to be redeployed in the same exact way that ensure that nothing will go wrong. Yeah, so apology, we had to go a little bit fast, but I'll be hanging around. If you guys have questions, stuff, you want to get that going, ping me and I'll come around and help you guys out. But let's wait until it finished deployment.
Yeah, so this should be a working directory. I'll show you.
Sorry, just one thing, guys. So once we merge to main, that kicks off a redeployment, right? And if you remember, what we did was that we just changed the title in the index of HTML. So now, let's go to our website that we deployed and refresh that. Okay, that didn't do anything, so let's hard refresh that. Might be caching issue. Did I change something wrong? I thought I would have changed the title in the index. But anyway, for you, let me just show you. Yeah, so that should be on a separate line, run working directory. Whoa. So it looks like the merge didn't go through. Oh, sorry guys, my bad. So I made that commit, right, to change the title, but I didn't push it. Okay, so my bad on that. No one called me out. I was like, why is it not working? Oh, damn it. Okay, Roger, just give me like 5 more minutes to sort of demonstrate that. Okay, guys, so yeah, what we did was basically we merged the changes that didn't include our title changes. So if I go to my GitHub Action branch, I will now create another pull request to merge, basically merging GitHub Action to main. Okay, cool. So now we should only see one commit, which is commit that changes title from React app to MSA yearbook. Go ahead, create a pull request and approve myself, which is really bad. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just don't approve your pull request when you work in a company. Yeah, that would be policy. Yeah, cool. So again, because we merged new changes into main, and our trigger is on main, it's gonna redeploy. Did anyone by any chance get it working? You did get it working? Yeah, so like in reality, it's always a good idea to remove the branch after you finish developing, because like by that point when you merge to main, right, that branch become obsolete. Yeah, we should delete it. And if you want to make further changes, create a new feature branch. It's just a really good practice. When you get into a company, you will run into some repo that has like 50 feature branch that's like 100 commits behind, and no one delete them, and you'll be like, man, like who left this branch hanging? So I'll go back and help you guys, but as you can see, it finished redeploying. Now if we go to our live website and refresh, hey, you can see the title is now MSA yearbook. Yeah, so you guys can check out my beautiful website if you want. So as you kind of progress throughout today, you'll be working on your feature branch, adding new features with Roger and stuff. When you want to see that features goes live, do a pull request to merge to main, and your feature will get redeployed to Azure. Yeah, cool. Sorry about the GitHub workflow file. I think some of us have problem with the syntax and stuff. So I'll leave this up and running and come around and help. Did you get it working by any chance? It's still deploying. Yeah, so hopefully you guys kind of get it going. But do you have any question before I pass it on to Roger? But I guess the question that she just asked was really good. It's like, what was this file? Like, what is this workflow file? This workflow file is basically, it's used by GitHub machine somewhere, and it basically tells that machine how this source code should be built and deployed. Yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Second question, how come the name of your main branch is called main instead of master?
Oh, because GitHub, due to political concern, GitHub has recently made changes to, they call it main now instead of master, because master is, superior, slave, master, yeah. So I honestly don't know why, but people get really sensitive. So now, from now on, in software industry, you're gonna start seeing the master branch called main. Yeah. So at most of the company, you probably still see master branch, but if you were to create a GitHub repo, it will now be called main by default. Yeah.
Git SCM will still call it master.
Yeah, yeah.
It's called Git init locally. It calls it master.
Yeah, so just keep that in mind, main, master, whatever. If you want to make people happy, call it main, I guess. But yeah. Any last question before I pass off? I'll still come around and help with CI/CD stuff, but yeah, essentially that's it. I guess last thing I want to leave off is this is really, really beneficial. It can save you a lot of time because say you're developing new features and stuff. Yeah, sure, you can run it locally, you can test it locally, but when you're ready to make it go live, you can now just do a pull request to merge to main and have your website redeployed and ready to go. And you can just ask your friend check out my new feature. I just pushed to production, right? And I think that aspect is really, really cool. It makes your development experience much better. Yeah. And if things break, then that's when you need to fix it. Cool. That's all about CI/CD and DevOps. Thank you so much, guys. I'll still come around and help if you guys are interested. Cheers. Yeah. Yeah, question? Okay, cool, I'll come around. Yeah, Roger, if you want to set up. Sorry, I took a little extra time.
No rush. Has everyone had enough time to do Paul's changes? Get the website deployed? Show of hands, who's actually got it running, on the website? One person? 2 people? A few more? Cool. I guess I'll make a start for the people who are waiting. So, if you look at your default application, let's call npm run. So npm start. You'll notice that hopefully your website starts up and you get the default website. So edit source app.tsx, save to reload, get a nice spinny icon. So now that we know that that runs, I guess I'll run you over the structure of the actual project. So in here, you'll notice something called source. That is the source code that's actually running. So in here, you got app.tsx, and it defines what the page looks like. Sure. And that will be my linter complaining about regular JavaScript. So your .git ignore, of course, is what you tell Git to ignore when you commit. So this file is saying, hey, don't commit, say, all my node packages to my repository when I install them. In here, and it says don't commit whatever I build. So when you call npm run build, that build folder doesn't get committed up to Git. And here you've got your packages.json. So in here, there's a few things. So it tells you what the name of your project is. It has something called dependencies. So as you call npm install, it adds those packages into here, and it tells essentially install what to look for in the future. Scripts is anything that you can run. So when you call npm run and you give it one of these names, it'll run essentially whatever's on the right-hand side in command line. And the rest of it's not particularly important. So what we're going to teach today is essentially how to build the front end, and we're also using something called Storybook. Has anyone here heard of Storybook? Yes, no? Cool. So Storybook sort of helps you manage your components. And the first step we've got to do is install Storybook. So call npx sb init. So that command there will essentially, when we run it, it will grab the Storybook command line and basically add Storybook to your project. And that will take a while to run. Yep.
Well, when we run the command, do we run it in our main branch or the feature/GitHub actions?
Oh yes, please do create a new feature branch for us. Cool. Weren't you happy? Ignore you. Cool. So while you're still installing it, just to show you what it looks like, when you run up Storybook, you get this page. And in here, you'll notice on the drop down, there's this example section, and it shows you a button, a header, a page. And in here, this is essentially a website component, right? Like if I go to that button, I can click it. So what Storybook essentially lets you do is it lets you test your components and build them outside of any websites and reuse them across websites. So for example, if I want to build, say, a custom button, I can test what happens in different states for the button, what happens when you click the button, and also what happens if I pass different, say, arguments, parameters when I create the button. And essentially to start it, once you've got that basic creation command done, is you call npm run storybook. And that will start it up. And if you check into that package JSON file in those scripts, you'll notice that Storybook has, in fact, added some scripts. to help it run, as well as some files into your sources folder. Has everyone managed to get Storybook running? Yes, no, show of hands. Couple of people, let's give it a few more minutes. Anyone need help getting it running? Cool, I guess we'll carry on then. So in that sources folder, right, where the source files are, you'll notice there's a new folder called stories. And down in there, it's got stuff like that button, that header, that page that you saw, that you can see when you're running it. So what Storybook does is it takes the components and anything you write this .stories file for, so .stories.tsx, gets rendered into Storybook. So let's add a new file to stories, right? And let's create a new component. Let's create a... I'm actually going to check docs real quick. What do they want you to create? Let's create a MSA header component. That is a file, not what I want. So in here, let's create a MSA header.tsx. And then let's import React from React. So let's include React in the project. Then if we look into here, in the docs, someone has kindly provided us a header object. So if we just copy that. Ah, he's used material UI. Cool. Sorry guys, one more step. So we're missing some packages, as you can tell by the red lines in this project. So if you open this up, VS Code doesn't know how to resolve these errors. So that's because it's missing some packages. So let's call npm install, and we're going to install something called material UI. And you're going to want to run that command across the core package. They have an icons package, and they also have a lab. So you're going to want to run a command that grabs these three packages with npm install. So basically, some package creators, what they do is they'll header their packages with that at, just to say, hey, this is our sort of contributor tag. For example, you'll have like at material UI says any package you find under here is for material UI. So it's just a naming convention that sort of started spreading around for Node. So now that that's installed, if we come here, we should be able to import it. So I can say import app bar. From Material UI core. And you'll notice that the error for the app bar's gone away. So, lovely. And if you open up your context menu, I think it's Control Space on Visual Studio Code. I've got an extension changing it to Alt-Enter. So, basically you have a context action. So if you mouse over something, you hit Quick Fix. There should be an option to say add all missing imports if you copy paste, and what that does is it fixes up your file. Really. You know what he's done? Sweet. So if you're looking for the code I've copy pasted, you will find it at essentially the MSA GitHub. So that would be here. So on the MSA GitHub, if you go into the front-end docs and you look at the Material UI integration docs, we've got a bunch of code in there that you can copy paste across. With that in mind, I'm very quickly just going to let's go D. I'll give everyone a few minutes to copy this over. Is it a little, yeah. Control.
Hey Roger, is this part under Storybook like 5? Is it in the 5th part?
So if you're looking for the code, it's
Yeah.
actually under part 3, Material UI. So the code, if you're looking to copy paste it over. And Kenny being Kenny. Anyone need help? If you're looking for the command, by the way, it's over here. If I can remember how to make it bigger. Nope, I guess I'm just copy pasting this into a file. So if you want to find the command, it is this command over here.
I think to zoom in, we can do Control Plus and try that. Does that work?
Not on this computer.
Oh,
Yeah. I can't remember the Linux keybind for get it, so I guess we're rolling with that. People are still going. Sweet, so carrying on. Has everyone got that command? Has everyone called it? Can I delete it? Sweet. So one quick change to the code that I forgot to mention is that menu icon. Please change that to a dehaze and import that at the top of the file. So you're looking at line 19 and line 3. So if you look at this file, you'll notice that useStyle still has an error. So let's define that. So we have a const useStyles, and that's equal to that. And then you'll want to import these. Cool. So, quick rundown of what happened there is we said that const useStyles now exists, and we said that it's equal to something called makeStyles. So makeStyles is a hook from Material UI. It's kind of like a function you can call, and it takes something called createStyles, which is also a function, and what it does is it generates CSS. So it generates some styling that we can apply in code to our components. So in here, you'll notice that while we fix the error for useStyles, classes currently doesn't have a root, a menu button, or a title. So let's change that. So in here, let's add a root, it's called menu button, and a title. And that fixes all errors. Can I get a quick show of hands who's actually caught up? Cool, I guess we'll give a couple more minutes for people to catch up.
So the code that you wrote there, is it to
This.
make the CSS?
Yeah, so basically what it does is it generates CSS from what you type. So like, for example, in here, I can say, for example, that the width property is, let's say 100%. So it takes CSS properties. Sweet, I guess we'll carry on so that, actually, you know what, we'll break for lunch. Coda, you good with that? Break for lunch here?
Sure. What else do we need to cover for this session?
Stories files and a couple more pieces.
Maybe if we finish this up and just run it, just to see what we've done, and then we can probably break.
Sweet. Cool. So in that case, in here, under MSA header, what we want to do is we want to add a new file. And we want to call it msaheader.stories.tsx. And if you come here real quick. Cool, so we don't need any of this stuff. Don't need that. Cool. So if we create a new folder file called msaheader.stories.tsx and we go over to something that already exists, like button.stories.tsx, and you just copy that and delete most of it till you get essentially this, you'll notice a few things about this file. For starters, there's an export at the top, and it says here's a default export, and it takes a title, a component, and then some argument types. So what we want to do is we want to change this component to be MSA header, and then we want to import that. Cool. We want to import that into here. Heads up, if you don't export this as MSA header, it is not going to be found. So please change the header in the MSA header file to be called MSA header. And then we don't take any arguments. Cool, so a bunch of changes just happened there. So essentially what's happening is in here, we're exporting a object, and in there we give it a title. Now, Storybook uses this title to locate where to put your file when it renders in the sidebar. So, for example, in button.stories.tsx, that renders at example/button. So we're saying that the MSA header in its story should render under UI components/MSA header. And we tell it what component to use. In this case, it is the MSA header component. And this here, these lines, are just typing it for TypeScript. So you're saying that this component meta, which is a type provided by Storybook's types, is the type of that object you just exported. Now the next thing to do is define a template. So you're saying that the story is essentially a function that will return your component. And then you want to export that and call bind. And if we run up Storybook now with those changes, the stories? Yep. No, I haven't actually trawled the docs very closely. It'll be under Storybook. But essentially what you'll get at the end is hopefully in your Storybook, there's now this new header section called UI components. There's a component called MSA header under it, and under basic header as the story, you'll be able to see the header rendered. And in terms of the code changes for that, did anyone manage to follow me through that? Yes, no? Cool. Does anyone need help? Sweet. Sweet. So did anyone finally manage to get the Storybook working? Yes, no? Good lunch? Cool. I guess we just push onwards now. So now that we've got through Storybook and how to make components, we should probably actually make something that's displayable in our website. So real quick, let's create a new file for a, say, submit form. And then if you go to the docs on the front end, there is a doc inside. I do believe it's material UI integration. And here, you want to copy step 2 and step 3 under submit form, and we just want to put that into our VS Code file. Void, cool, that's because it returns nothing. Then in here, we just want to very quickly copy this. Cool, and we import the button. I guess we make this compile. Cool. Ah. Sorry guys, one sec. Sweet. That was a lot of copying and pasting. So basically in this doc, we've got a main form body. You want to grab that under step 3, put that into that file. That helps with not having to write an entire submit form ourselves. And then you'll want to copy over, you want to copy over that handle submit function that we have defined down here. And what that'll do is it'll make handle submit actually do something sensible or meaningful. And now if you go to the app.tsx file, currently it just returns our default app from create React app. You can change that to return the submit form and import it. If we go npm start, we should see that boot up and render. Oh, we got it running. Sorry guys, one sec. Over here. Cannot resolve ./submitform.css. Cool. So it doesn't like that import. I don't have the CSS file, do I? Okay, with that in mind, screw it. Let's just write a submit form. So if we create a submit form, first thing we're going to need is a form component, which should be a MUI import. So in here we add something called a form control. And then you can label the input. And then we submit it by the project name. Still get the text content. So that gives us a control for the project name. We'll just copy that, paste it. I guess we'll recreate the actual form. So we pop that open. We have a project name, a GitHub URL, and a description. So in code, we'll just put in the GitHub URL. And for now, we can ignore the description and we will put in a submit button. Add no missing exports. And here, the button has an on click. Probably some text for the button label. This is our default export. Cool. And once that runs up, we see a basic form. It's populatable, and you can put values in here. It's obviously not styled at the moment, so let's add a tiny bit of styling to that. So what we can do in here, under the form controls, so we can wrap that in a div. Put a div in here. And then we can add some styling, like that. And we can say that its display is flex and that its flex direction is column. Doesn't seem to have modified that at all. And now we see the submit button is underneath the GitHub and project name. So submit button is now somewhere a little more sensible. Cool. So I guess one last piece of styling to center the inputs. That doesn't work because I need to align the contents. Cool. I can't get that alignment working. I guess we'll leave it and carry on for now and explain how that form works, and I will get the CSS for that sorted later. So essentially what we're doing is we're defining a new component. It's called a submit form. It's got a handle click function for now. Let's just make that do an alert. Just so we know that the form button actually triggers something. And in here, there's two form controls. So the form controls are what you see rendered as the text fields. So if we open that up again, these are the form controls. So in this case, the name we set for them for project name and GitHub URL, and their descriptions are rendered as the controls, and the button, of course, is rendered here as submit. Now, if we refresh and relaunch our server, so that handle click is actually called. You'll notice that when you click submit, you get a little alert, and it just tells you that that submit form's been clicked, just to test that that works. Everyone following so far in terms of how that form works? Show of hands, who's caught up? Yes, no, kind of. Cool. I guess we'll give people a couple of minutes to catch up and for me to fix the CSS. Sweet. Sweet. The actual running app? Right, app.tsx wise, and here all you do is you say you return the form. Sweet. Does anyone need help with this part? Yes, no, show of hands. Raise your hands if you do need help getting this working. The submit form again? Sweet, that's the submit form. My linter is complaining right now because of my TS config. It's going to be big enough, is it? Okay, cool. This is code if you guys need it. Is that big enough? Like, can people see that? Yes, no? Sweet. Sorry, do you guys want me to actually indent this to be a little more sensible? Hmm? So,
Start the Visual Studio, restart the Visual Studio because all those lights go.
yeah, I could.
Very daunting.
Well, right, I guess I'm just used to my Visual Studio code being bricked half the time. Yeah. It's just because it only reads the tsconfig once, so if you screw in tsconfig, it bricks itself afterwards. At least that's normally what happens. I guess I just have a bad config. 1 second. If I just remove that. It's just out of date. Has everyone managed to get the form rendering on their main page? Like, show of hands, who's caught up? 2, 3 people? We'll give a couple more minutes. No rush, it's just Apollo client left. For let's make it look like our page. No, I don't think I will teach them that. No, not really, because we haven't taught them anything other than when we CSS, because that's all they need to get this working. Like, I don't think there's anything custom at all.
So what are the concepts that they're not familiar with CSS? I guess they can tell CSS as well. Do you have things to play with?
Yeah, we'll
Anything else? I guess JavaScript calls, JavaScript methods, what you're doing now?
We don't make any raw JavaScript calls, I don't think.
Stuff like that, the handlers.
That's not a JavaScript handler, dude. That's in React. It's a callback function passed through to JSX. Slightly different than a raw. Like, I'm not actually calling the button dot event handler. Like, I'm not registering an event handler. It's the React version, so it's all wrapped.
Whatever it's called.
Use effect I'm going to have to cover, but that'll come with a Apollo client.
Cool.
Yeah. Should be good.
Yeah, and then just cover up the mapping and stuff.
The mapping stuff's actually all auto-generated from Apollo client. They cover the mapping from the call. GraphQL's nice if you can get it working. If you can't get it working, it's a nightmare. Good?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Does that not need because I was helping one of the dude, and doesn't that need a closing div, or is that kind of like a self? I'm not the best with stuff.
Closing divs down here. There's 2 divs.
Yeah, but like that one, how it's like a div element as well. Don't we need like a closing div there?
This thing is,
It's like already like
it
complete.
knows that that's one entire group, right? So this
right.
is the same as if I put brackets around the whole call body.
Oh, okay.
So if I put a bracket, if I'm being explicit, right, ignoring the TypeScript error that doesn't actually
No,
exist.
I meant like just that first line, because like what we had to do to fix our one was like we had to close the div for like just these 2 lines, or is that not a thing?
No, you don't need to.
Oh, you don't need to. It's like already complete.
Well, it knows that it needs to add all of that stuff to the div.
Oh, as like when you open it.
Yeah.
Oh.
So I close it later. So I'm saying that.
Oh, because like you're applying that style to like all of this.
Yeah. I'm saying
I
that
see.
that wrapper
Yeah.
says that all of those styles exist across
I
its
see.
body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see,
It's a
that
bit of a
makes sense.
lazy way to do styles because normally you shouldn't inline them, but
I see. I think what tripped me off was like, yeah. Okay, cool. Oh.
sorry, the red lines probably don't help. Cool. Does anyone else need any help? Yes, no? Everyone caught up? Cool. So, show of hands who was here for the session last week where CZ taught the backend stuff. Who was here for the API stuff? Got like 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, like half the room, cool. So, we need to make a call, of course, to our backend. So,
It wasn't properly implemented, I think. Like, it was kind of half functioning. Like,
So, all good. Yep. I think he made me aware of that fact. So we've got our own version of that set up that's running. So we'll just use that and hope we don't crash the API. Sweet. So essentially, we want to use something called Apollo Client. So Apollo Client is like a front-end client library for a website. And it sort of helps you make those calls, those GraphQL calls to access our backend. So we need to add those libraries to our solution, right? So npm install, and you want to install something called Apollo Client and GraphQL, and just let that run. So GraphQL is, of course, the GraphQL library, and Apollo Client is... Why do you not like the fact that I'm trying to install an Apollo Client? Can you not find it? Interesting. Okay, cool. I need to update my docs as well because then I may have screwed that up in my docs. And then you want to do Apollo / client. Hmm? Oh, is it just Apollo - client? So I didn't need the @ Cool, sweet, thank you. I will fix a typo on the docs because. Thanks. Yep, so npm install GraphQL and npm install Apollo - client, and you don't need the @ The @ actually causes it to break because that is not a valid space. So now that those are installed, go ahead and run. I'll put these commands up just so you can see them afterwards. you want to install something called @types. So @types is essentially a space where you will find type definitions for TypeScript, and you want to add a command called savedev. So those two commands, just so that people can see them, are and speaking of, I missed that. Cool. So you want to run these two commands. And hopefully that should all work. Same thing, raise your hands if you need help, guys. And one of the MSPs will run over and help you out. Has everyone managed to get that command running? Sweet, carrying on then. So now we need to go to the package JSON file, and in scripts, we're going to add a script. Specifically, we're going to add a script called generate. So just to break the script down a little, because we did copy and paste it in, essentially what the script does, I haven't screwed that up either. Cool. So let's call it npm run generate. Ooh, it doesn't like that. Why? Interesting. Ah. Can I do that with npx? Yeah. Okay. So slight amendment to the command. Interesting that doesn't run. And you have to tell it to target something. No operations of code found with the TypeScript target. Cool. So, oh. Just give me the JSON. GraphQL. Interesting that that doesn't work, considering that these are all defined in here. Because I don't have cool. Yeah, but the command is giving me an error and I'm not too sure why. Because we download it from the endpoint, so the schema is correct. But the TypeScript is causing me some errors on the generate. Now we got types. Yeah. Last I checked, that command works, so long as you have the Apollo client. I mean, we install it globally. I think we'll generate, that should have run. Okay. Well, let's just switch repos real quick to the MSA one and see what the command does in here. Sorry guys, 1 second. I think that's not, I think that's a generated file. Oh, it's Delta. Maybe we can try it. No, let's close that. Ah. We need to write a query first. Yep. So we actually need to write the query fragments first. Is probably why that command doesn't like us. I mean, what file do I test it in? I should just test it in here. Let's just install that. Yep.
What's the difference between when you use it using those curly braces and when you don't use it?
Default versus implicit reference. So implicit exports you have to reference with the curly braces. Default exports you don't. You can only have one default export though, so that's like the default thing you're accessing. Cool. With that in mind, I guess I tried the command on here. Cool. I can't tell you whether that works or not.
GraphQL schema JSON to the other project.
This one? We don't actually write this. This is generated, so I think the plan is if this doesn't work, we'll generate it in this project and just grab the generated code and dump it in the other one. Because that's schema, right? If I just delete it, paste it. Yeah, so it loads the Apollo project fine. What it doesn't like is generating those query files for some reason. So with that failing, I guess what we'll do is in here, we will go with pulling the 2021 phase 2. So, do you guys have the GitHub repo for phase 2 installed? Yes, no? Cool. Can everyone go to that repository, please, over here? You'll find it at that URL. Go to code and see where it says HTTPS for this. Gives you a link. Can you copy that and clone it, please? So to do that, you come in here, you open a terminal. And you call git clone with that URL. Yeah. I don't know what difference that makes. Probably also easier to call by the looks of it. Yeah, clone phase 2, guys. Please and thank you. Cool, so that obviously doesn't work. So with that in mind, I guess we'll just have to push on with at least getting GraphQL set up in the meantime. So while that's cloning, let's define our client. So over here in the docs, in the front end, on our documentation, and an Apollo client. In here we have this Apollo provider that we're wrapping stuff in. So what we want to do is we want to add the Apollo provider to the React strict mode render of app, and we just want to put the Apollo provider here. And then we want to import that Apollo provider from the Apollo client. And that's going to complain because we need to provide a client. And that client is going to be our GraphQL client. And then over here, we're just going to borrow this to set up the client. So when you guys set up your APIs last week, they weren't quite working, correct? So we'll point them to our one, which is in here. So you want to point this to the endpoint here out of the index. So the GraphQL client should go to here. And we're going to need to import the in-memory cache. And that client is now supplied to our React DOM. And just to double check that that works, if we call npm run start, that should compile and run. And we should still see our website, and it will look like nothing's changed. Cannot find name Apollo client. That's products I have to use. So let's just save that real quick. Refresh the page. That's stale. Cool. Cannot find name Apollo client. Probably because I haven't imported it. That'd help. Cool. So after adding the Apollo client provider, hopefully nothing breaks when you add it to index.tsx, but you're looking to change index.tsx to look something like this. Now with this change, this means that our Apollo client knows about the URI, which is the Apollo endpoint, and it now has access to a cache for memory. I wonder what happens if I just call run generate now and see what it does. Nah, it's not happy with me. Cool. There are two ways we can do this. We can either copy and paste what's generated, or we can type stuff manually. And let's do some typing. Cool. So back in our submit form, we can do const loading data error is equal to, there's now a something called use mutation. It's a hook. And essentially what it tells us is it's provided from Apollo client. And what you do is you provide it a GraphQL query and some arguments, and it will fire those arguments and send an update request essentially to our backend. Now, if we take that from the docs, we just borrow the hook that someone's already written to make our lives a little easier. So in here, if we check out the submit form on this page in .story, in the submit form, we have a submit form. You'll notice that the submit form here has a state and it says use mutation. And this mutation is auto-generated, so if you check the API's generated mutations, we have a mutation here called add project, and it uses a fragment called project. So if we copy that out over to yearbook, let's grab the definitions we need. So let's start with this const. Import the GraphQL, and then let's go grab that fragment as well that it's trying to use. So up in here in fragments, there is a fragment for project over here. And that's not defined because the order needs to be a little different. Cool. So what these do is they're essentially the mutations that we can fire. So we say that we're going to add a project and we're going to use a mutation to do it. And the other thing we're going to have to pass that is, of course, the argument for, where's the code that's already got it written? So I don't have to tab everywhere. So we're saying that add project is a mutation where we add a project, and then when we call it with some variables, and then we pass it those variables to tell it what it should be adding. So with that in mind, let's copy this new handle submit across. It's going to get confusing. Right, and let's replace handle click with handle submit. Cool. So in here, we are going to start with essentially the code from the phase 2. And in here, we need to get the name, description, link, and year across for the mutation. And handle the submit. So what this is doing is it is saying that when I add the project, I'm going to pass through these variables, and currently we are going to give it a blank description because our form doesn't have it, and the year we're just going to set to 2021. So in here, we need to use the project name from our form input. So we need to extract the text from the form control. And that text is essentially whatever is in the input. So in here, what we can do is we can define those input controls outside of what we return. So in here, I can say that that's the name control. And it's complaining about the JSX flag. And then I can say that we also have a URL control, which is equal to the URL input here. And with that in mind, I can then put these back as variable references to name control and URL control. So this lets us reference the variables from outside, and let's define these at the top of the file over here. Now, project name doesn't exist, but what we can do is we can do name control dot, and we can look at the values in here. So we can look at the key values and the property values. But I can't set them in here. So I guess we'll have to put some change handlers in. Yep. Cool. So in this input, with the aria described, we can set onChange to be equal to a function, and we are going to set it to the text that is already here. So in here, let's define a new function called handle name update, which takes an event. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a couple of constant values, which is the name, set name. That's a use effect. Use state, sorry. And then we also want another const, which is URL set URL, which is equal to a use state of blank. Cool. So then we do that. And we call it handle input update as the method. So on change, what we can do for these inputs is we can say that they will trigger a function, which is equal to the handle input update. So what we're essentially doing is we're saying that whenever the input field changes, we are going to set a value of the name to whatever the name that is, That's not going to work. And we're going to need 2 of these functions because we're tracking 2 variables here. We're tracking the name, and we're also tracking the URL. So we need to be able to set the URL value to whatever we want the target value to be. So in this case, it's whatever comes out of the handle URL update. And with that all done, we can put these controls in, down there, URL control, and cool. And then in here, I can say that the name is now equal to the name, and the link is equal to the URL, with name and URL being the states we set. Everyone following so far still? Did I lose you guys along the way? Yes, no? Cool. Let's update the handle submit so that it looks sensible and it looks like it's going to run. And then we just call npm run start. And hopefully that compiles. My linter is a little unhappy. Return outside of function. Is it? Ah. I have too many braces. Oh, is it going to error me on the TypeScript? Yeah, it is. Cool. So for now, let's just say that event has any type. In practice, it's not great to use any, because what you're essentially saying is you don't really care what type it is. But when you're testing or you're writing stuff quickly, any is pretty good when you just want to say, I don't really care what the type is. Just let it run. Errors, cool, compiles. So now that our application is compiling again, if we hit F12, right, we pull up something called the developer console. So you can see the console and you can see what network traffic you have. So in here, let's punch in a project name, some new project, and let's punch in a URL. Let's go to not localhost. Let's go to Google as our test URL. And then we click submit. And over here we get a GraphQL query and it fetches and it sends. And over here we see that year got an invalid value. So year doesn't like 2021. So what we're going to do is we're going to set that to a string type value, and we're going to recompile the server. And we're going to try send that submit request again with the same values. Once it compiles, let's just do some other test with the same URL, Google. And before I click submit, if we open the terminal, when you click submit, you get a GraphQL fetch, so it tries to create that link. God damn, it's easy. And it says user not authenticated. So we have added authentication to the backend API that we're running. Sweet. So essentially I turned it to a string. So if you look at the type for project, it's a year, but you can't quite tell. So if you navigate to, if you did the backend thing, you'll know about this already, but if you navigate to here, you'll see something called banana cake pop, and it's essentially the page that GraphQL serves you. And if you come in here and you click this little booklet, that opens the query schema. So if you go into projects and you look at the project type, the year is a year, and that is an enum value of year 2021, so it accepts a string value. So if we pass it a string, it accepts it, and if we pass it a number, the GraphQL schema will reject us, which is what has happened there. Unfortunately, we've added authentication, and I don't believe that's going to be part of the scope we're teaching, so we'll have to leave the GraphQL there. But I can walk you through what that submit form does. So from the top, these exported consts here should normally be auto-generated. Not too sure why the auto-generator is not working. Hopefully we can update the docs with how to get that running. But essentially what you're defining is using GraphQL, there's something called a fragment. And the fragment is what defines a project. So a project has an ID, a name, a description. And if you look into here, that correlates to the ID, name, description here. But it also cuts out fields. So for example, we don't want to define the student again in our project on our front end because we don't want to send that entire object through. So we give it a partial definition. And then we define something called add project. So when you query GraphQL, you can either query, mutate, or subscribe. The only ones you really need to worry about are query and mutation. So query is like a GET request. You go, give me the particular data I query for, and in this case, a mutation is when you try change the values in the schema when you try read. So we want to mutate because we're submitting by adding a project. So we define a mutation that adds a project taking those parameters, and it calls add project. Again, should be auto-generated. Coming into here, add project is essentially a function, and we say that when you use the mutation add project from up here, this definition here, our function is going to be set as add project. And then we also define something using useState. So that useState is a React hook. And what it says is I'm going to give you a variable and a function. The variable you can only read from, but the function will let you set it. So it lets you track the state of whatever you tell it to track. And it doesn't matter when stuff updates, you will have that state and the updated state. So it causes the DOM essentially to update whenever the variable is updated, so you can see the change. So it reflects on the website itself, outside of the JavaScript code that's running back here. And then we define two functions here, which we use later on, and they handle events, so they're essentially event handlers. And then further down, we define the form controls outside, and we set them so that when the value changes in that on change here, they trigger that handler that we set, so handle name for name and handle URL for handle URL, that say, hey, set the name or set the URL to some new value for when we send it. And then finally, in the button that we use for submit, when you click it, it calls the handle submit function, which tries to fire the GraphQL mutation. And in our case, fails us due to authentication. Any questions? Everyone get that? I know it's a bit wordy. And has anyone managed to follow me up to the state and code? Can anyone get the form to give them this lovely error here where they tell them that they're not authorized for the resource? Show of hands, who's still following with me? Got one person following along, great. Cool, let's go through slowly. So let's start with the form. So code-wise, you are going to want to put this stuff at the top. And I'll give you a few minutes to, I guess, catch up. Now I can multi-open this. Right. Cool. And if anyone needs help, just please put your hand up, and I'm sure one of the MSPs will run around to help you out. While I go look at how they did the authentication. Yep.
Was that part Apollo client?
So the part at the top?
Like where if we were to sort of go on the GitHub to follow
Cool. So Apollo client will give you some of this stuff. Those particular sections aren't actually documented. So on the GitHub, they'd be under components, submit form set as component. So if you copy paste what's on the GitHub in the submit form, if you follow the docs, it'll get you to essentially what the story. But I think,
Do you remember which section it was?
section 3, I think it's pure UI components. Yeah. We'll get you the code to here.
Do you really want to just go through the query? So you can't write to it, but you can still query it, right?
So I guess I can run through how to, can we query it?
Yeah, I was able to query it from the GraphQL.
The issue with the GraphQL, I can check real quick. So I guess if we just try, I know, add a project through here. Because I can query, right? Yeah.
All to add.
Oh yeah, no, query is not protected. You're right. So I could fire a query request and show that coming through. But I guess I just dumped the data to an alert because but for now, let's at least get them to the point where their mutation tries to go through and fails.
We just stop it first as well so they can have a new thing to follow through. So create a new component and then just put everything related to that Apollo query in that component.
Or I could just copy paste all through.
I think that's a good idea.
Hmm? Yeah, I don't think.
So I
we-
guess like if you guys are interested in more information or you need help with CI/CD, hit me up. Frontend, hit Roger up. Emotional support, just hit any of us up. And again, I just want to stress, don't be disheartened. I know that there's so much stuff that we go through, and it's just the nature of doing a one-day boot camp. We had so much that we want to teach you guys, but as you can see, we struggle to go through it. But I think the most important thing is that you guys have taken the initiative to come here, get started, dive headfirst into technical development. And I think that's the most important part, because honestly, each of us here today, I know that we are all working in the software industry now, but we're just struggling when we first started off, the same as you guys. We realized that uni didn't really teach us anything, so we had to spend a lot of time struggling outside of uni and just learning in our own time. So definitely don't be disheartened if you didn't understand anything we taught today. I would say that if you have to go home, do a bit of extra study, go through the content at your own pace, reach out for help. We're on Discord. I'll definitely find time to answer questions and stuff. You can reach out to us personally as well. Yeah, man, go for it. But yeah, we're just really here to help, and we just really hope that you guys get to where you want it in the software world. Yeah, just a bit of a word of encouragement there.
Pretty much, unless we want to, I guess I'll show off what happens if you do actually get a query through. So over here, the mutation bounces you. And if you go here and you try the exact same mutation request, so let's send a mutation to add a project. And it takes ID, name. So it takes everything. So I guess we give it a name, description, link, and year. They're double quoted. Description and year. So we send a mutation request. This will return something when you add the project. So what it does is it returns the project it adds. So what we do is on the return type, we expect it to give us the name back. Mutation.add project. Actually, we expect it to give us nothing back, apparently. Oh, 1 sec. Sorry, guys. I'll pull that back up. Which means I'll probably steal this window back from you guys. Yeah, cool. You get the same error back if you fire a mutation on banana cake pop. Yeah, so I guess I'll just show that here. Has everyone managed to catch up with the submit form stuff? Show of hands who's currently up to date. Cool. So just something to show quickly. So if we go back to the Chrome with the submit, you notice how when I click submit, I get a nice red response that says, error, the current user is not authorized to access this resource. So if we go through to here, so that URL we put into the index, right, when we make the client. If you go to that URL, like that URI, it'll put you to something called banana cake pop, and this is essentially how you query and edit stuff. So if we write the exact same mutation in here and we hit go, we get the exact same error back. So we are actually trying to hit the endpoint correctly. It is just telling us that we can't do it due to authorization. Now just to quickly show off what a query does, if we query. So if we query for something like projects, and we ask it for the nodes, which is all the projects it returns, and their names, that gives us a list here, which is a list of all the names that currently exist on the repository. So with all those names, of course, we can also fire this query in code. So in here, where we have the const add project, right, the mutation, if we go back to, I closed it, cool. So essentially you have an auto-generated fragment. So we have to come through here, go to here. So in here, this is the phase 2, right? So this is the GitHub repo that we have. If you go into source API and you go to queries, it'll actually show you what's being called. And in here, there's a query for projects with essentially, I'm just going to take the entire fragments folder at this point. This shows you what is auto-generated. So these are all the queries that you would need to write to query GraphQL. So if we copy this particular snippet, which is the projects query to go fetch projects, and we come back here to submit form, and we just very quickly put that into code here, and then go and retrieve the fragments file that is trying to relate to, and just paste that into our source. And we import it. It really doesn't want to import. Okay. I guess we'll just copy it out. Page info and student. So if we grab all the related fields it needs for that query, right, for projects as a query to function, and then we come here and we do const and do loading data error is equal to use query projects, then we can have a use effect which ends when data changes. And let's just add that as a query. It's possible. And we just console log that. And we rerun. What we get is, if we hit F12, just look at our console. Cool, let's move that. Cool. When this boots up, we still get our page, but if you look at the console, in here, we have an object which says projects, project connection. And if you look in here, under, it's going to be in value of, is it? It's under projects itself. Go to nodes. In here, you can see all the projects that we had. So this is essentially the projects that we got from Banana Cake Pop. So if I were to in code ask it for its projects and its nodes, and then the names of those nodes, and printed them out, we would see something like what we'd see over here, which is the names of these projects. So that's how you fire the query through GraphQL. Did anyone follow me through that at all? Yes, no, show of hands, anyone get what was happening? Sweet. Where did I lose everybody? I guess we'll start from here. So essentially, this is the back end. If you fire a query, you get some data back, right? Everyone following with me so far on this? Show of hands. Who understands what's happening when I'm calling this? Cool. So this is essentially the API. So I'm going to the API and I'm saying, hey, show me all the projects that you have and the project name is what I'm doing. So over here, when you see the response, so that's the query. And the response is on the right-hand side. And the response, in this case, when I hit run, is it gives me all the names. I can also ask it for the year, for example. And it would show me that every project we have comes from 2021. Does that make sense? Everyone get that? Cool. So if we want to do that from code, that npm run generate command that we unfortunately can't get working on this project, it generates things that look like fragments. So if I switch my VS Code to the MSA project, so we're on the MSA project right now, under API, this is all generated. So this is what that Apollo client command, npm run generate, gives you. And it defines what a project is, what a student is, so that you can ask the API, hey, can you give me data? Still following? Yep. Cool. And then in mutations and queries, it shows you what sort of commands you can pass through. For example, if I send it projects, it gives me back the projects. If I send it project, it gives me one project. So what I've done for the tutorial is I've copy-pasted those type defs out and put them into the submit form. So that's the line of definitions up and down here. Still with me? Who's still following what I'm going on with? Sweet, Paul, I'm glad you understand. Cool. So essentially in the code, we set up something called we call something called useQuery. And useQuery comes from a library. It comes from the Apollo client library, right? And when we call useQuery and we pass it this projects query, which we've defined, it returns three things. It returns a loading variable, a data variable, and an error. And loading is a Boolean. So if loading is true, it's still loading, data's undefined. If loading's false, you either have data or an error. And then all I'm doing is I'm displaying the contents of data in here. So I'm saying that when you give me the data, I'm just going to put it into the console. Who's with me still? A couple of people? Sweet. So if we go into that console here, can anyone read this console? Like, how legible is that? Can you read it from where you are? Sweet. Let's just control zoom doesn't work. Control plus. Yeah. So in this console, right, we get back that object. And if you open the object and you take a look inside, it has this property, like this projects property on it. And if you go in there and you open up the nodes and you take a look at the name, the ID, and all of that stuff, you'll notice that it's given us back the exact same contents with the year for every project being 2021. Everyone still with me? Yes, no? Cool, so that's how we fire a query for essentially fetching data. And the other query from earlier, use mutation, is how we change data. Unfortunately, we've locked that on our API behind an authentication wall, so we can't quite access it. And I think that just about wraps up all the front-end stuff. So you've essentially learned how to use Storybook. We've touched a bit on the GraphQL queries, managing package lock, and creating some components. Any questions? Yep.
Just wondering, can you short explain about the JSON web tokens of how it's working with the elements and
The JSON?
yeah, the GWT, the authentication stuff.
Ah, like how authentication works.
Yes, then combined with the elements and stuff.
Yeah, so currently we're not authenticating when we try query, which is why it's telling us we can't access it. If you want to implement authentication, if you pull the GitHub repo, if you're using GraphQL, and you take a look inside our GraphQL client, you'll notice that there is a authentication link. And that authentication link is essentially used by our React router on the model project, so sort of the MSA yearbook example. And what it's doing is it's saying, can you go grab a token and fetch a token from GitHub, and then using that token, pass it to the backend client to authenticate. And if you actually look at that token value, that's a bearer token. So it's a JWT token. So if you took that token and you went to jwt.io, you can actually decode that token and take a look at what data's in it. But that's essentially how we're doing the tokens. It's a little much to teach, I think, given all the other content we have. So we can, I guess, give a rundown of it in the documentation if that's something you guys want. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Coda, I guess it's up to you now.
Cool. So I guess I kind of went through some of the front-end concepts. Let me just pull this back onto the lectern. Reset. So yeah, as you'll note, you wouldn't have ended up something like this, but what we are trying to do is, I guess, show you how to build components so that then you could go ahead and build these ones yourself with the couple of weeks that we have, or I guess the month and a half that we have to do phase 2. In saying that though, this entire web page, in terms of its components, how it's implemented, the login, that's all on our repo, so feel free to just clone it, have a look through and see kind of how it's implemented, take inspiration from it for your own project, and kind of go from there. We've also got a Discord group and a Facebook group, so I guess as you guys are starting to build this stuff, if any questions pop up or if you guys want any more workshops, just add feedback on there and we can always run more sessions on areas which we didn't cover today that are a little bit more challenging. I guess you guys will probably know there are docs, so on the front end, if you click on docs, these readmes here, they're all docs that kind of take you through what we went through today, so creating the React web app, some of the material UI stuff, and this one goes through extra components we didn't cover today, so things like, I guess we did the header component, but stuff like the footer component, sidebar, what else do we have on here? And then using the submit form. And the way the submit form is built in the docs is slightly different to how it's done today, but either or, I guess you could build it whichever way you guys like. Cool, so I guess that's that. And then in terms of this, so yeah, this is the URL, so feel free to navigate to it. I'll add this link up into the GitHub so that it's easy, and then feel free to log in and have a play around and kind of see how it works. That's totally cool. Moving over to the assignment itself, so I guess it comes down to, so what needs to be done for phase 2? So if we click on general stream assignment, so the assignment details are on the GitHub page. So we've got basically basic requirements and advanced requirements. So in terms of the basic requirements, I guess it's ideally building something like this with the front end and the back end. Now, this example one kind of just takes submissions of GitHub URLs. What we want you guys to do is, it can look something similar, maybe a different color scheme, but the idea itself should be slightly different. So rather than taking GitHub links, it could maybe build something like a Reddit clone. So you could take Reddit links or whatever other links that you want. People can submit those. They can add a description. And then, as you note from last week, we added some functionality in the database to take comments. So you could build some sort of comment functionality within these cards so that others can comment down. But I guess it really comes down to thinking of an idea that could be, I guess, kind of used inside the sort of, I guess, this front-end looking sort of component, so a card component, sidebar, submitting something, logging in. But yeah, I guess it's not really limited, so feel free to just use whatever your imagination is. And the idea doesn't need to be groundbreaking either, so anything is totally cool.
Also doesn't have to be GraphQL. If you're happy using REST APIs, doesn't have to be React either. You could use Angular, you could use Blazor, you can use whatever you want to build it.
And I guess like just an idea, it can really be anything. Like for an example, when I did MSA 2-3 years ago, I suppose you guys know League of Legends or whatever games you play. I built like a website and you could like look up player stats, like OPGG. I just built like a clone of that, but it's like a much simpler version. So yeah, you can look up games API. Maybe you want to like use those. Just something fun that you guys.
Poke API is still up, so if you want to do Pokemon, you can still create that. That's REST. GitHub itself has GraphQL endpoints. Normally, if you just search up what has it, you can use GraphQL. pretty much everything has a REST API. So if you're doing REST, you'll be able to hit it pretty much any API you can think of.
Yep.
So long as you have the auth.
And yes, I guess basic requirements, super basic. So, and yeah, like I said, idea doesn't really matter. Literally just a React app using TypeScript, create a backend using GraphQL. As mentioned, you can use REST API if you want. But I guess because we taught GraphQL, it might be a little bit easier. And then save whatever data that makes sense for your, I guess, your project or idea. Save that into a database, which we covered last week as well. Apollo client, so we kind of touched on this today, and there's docs on this as well to kind of help a little bit more. UI library, so this is that material UI that you guys downloaded using NPM. Responsive, so I guess kind of when you drag it, it kind of fits in quite nicely. So it kind of expands. I think it might be a little bit broken, but try and make it as responsive as you can. Source control, so you guys have been doing this, so having a Git repo and then pushing it up to there, and then deploying using GitHub Actions, so what we covered in the morning today. So that's super basic requirements. Yep, so we'll get to advanced in one moment. So in terms of this basic stuff, so don't feel too constrained, like try and do as much as you can, and I guess, yeah, it's really just for us to see that you guys have kind of learned stuff and that you have learned stuff and built something up and deployed it. So yeah, nothing super hard there should be. In terms of advanced requirements, so hoping that you guys pick some of these, so hopefully at least 4, and we've covered a bunch of this stuff, so integrating components using Storybook, so we covered Storybook today. Unit testing, so this is something we haven't covered, but there's some good documentation online in order to use Jest. OAuth, we'll be creating docs for this, so then you guys can hopefully look through that, or you can just look through the repo because we've implemented it in there. This one's a nice easy one, so creating custom branding. So I guess for this one you've seen we've used this sort of purple and some logos. Feel free to create your own logo and your own color scheme. That's a nice, easy, advanced requirement. And then in terms of backend, so we kind of touched on this last week, but using a public API. So while you'll have your own API using GraphQL, using another API to kind of get some data and integrating that with your database would be quite good. Using a data loader, and if you want, you could use a different type of database, so using NoSQL. So yeah, I guess just 4 of these bullet points, or as many as you can do. And if 4 is a little bit hard, that's totally cool as well, but try and get through as many as you can. In terms of submission, so we'll create a form that you can kind of upload your GitHub repo and your name and stuff, and do that by September, so you've got a month and a half to do it. In terms of this, so once you've done this, there'll be a little bit of a presentation to kind of talk through your project as well, and that's kind of the bulk of it. So we'll create a slot where you can have a 15-minute sort of presentation slot, so 7 minutes of presentation, 7 minutes Q&A, and it's kind of just for you to show us what you built, any difficulties you had, us just to kind of ask questions to make sure that you guys built it, and that's pretty much it. Yeah, and then I guess that's kind of it. Any questions on the assignment criteria? Yeah, I guess this is slightly different to uni. So we're not really expecting like a cookie cutter thing, just be as creative as you want. So long as it kind of meets these requirements, that's totally cool. Yeah. But yeah, yeah, any questions that you guys go through, feel free to post on Discord, Facebook group. But other than that, I guess that's the workshop today. We can probably wrap up early. So yeah, and if you guys want any more workshops or boot camps to talk through anything, yeah, just let us know. Cool. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll stick around for a little bit if there's any more questions. But other than that, probably can just head home.
Yeah,
cool.
You just have a round of applause.
Oh yeah, for Roger. Yes.